Commander Sarah Chen stared through the reinforced viewport of the lunar module Artemis, her breath steady, despite the gravity of their mission. The dark expanse of the moon's far side stretched endlessly below them, a landscape that had fascinated humanity for generations. Now, after months of preparation and years of planning, they were about to become the first humans to establish a permanent presence here. Landing sequence initiated, announced Dr. James Morrison, their pilot and navigation specialist. His fingers danced across the holographic controls with practiced precision. All systems nominal. Sarah nodded, though her attention was fixed on a peculiar formation near their designated landing zone. Something about its symmetry seemed unnatural. She'd studied every available satellite image of this region, but this structure, if that's what it was, didn't appear in any of them. Mission Control, this is Artemis. We're beginning our final descent, Sarah reported, maintaining protocol despite knowing there would be a delay in their response. Radio communications had to be relayed through their satellite network to reach the other side of the moon. The four-person crew had trained together for this mission for 3 years. Besides Sarah and James, there was Dr. Emily Wong, their xenogeologist and technical officer Marcus Rodriguez, responsible for their advanced scanning and detection equipment. They were the best of the best, chosen specifically for this classified mission under the guise of a routine lunar base construction project. But Sarah knew better. The real reason for their presence here was known only to a handful of people back on Earth. The anomalous energy signatures detected 6 months ago had set off a chain of events that led to this moment. 200 meters to touchdown, James announced. LZ looking clear. Emily leaned forward in her harness, her dark eyes reflecting the stark lunar surface below. Commander, that formation to the northwest, are you seeing this? Affirmative, Sarah replied, glad she wasn't the only one who'd noticed. We'll investigate after establishing base camp. The landing was textbook perfect, barely a shudder as the module's legs touched down on the ancient regolith. For a moment, no one spoke, each lost in their own thoughts about what they might discover here so far from home. Marcus broke the silence first, his voice tight with controlled excitement. Initial scans are interesting. The energy signature we detected from Earth? It's stronger here, much stronger. Sarah unclipped her harness and moved to check his readings. The holographic display showed a pulsing pattern of energy emanating from the direction of the unusual formation, unlike anything she'd seen in her 15 years with NASA. All right, team, she said, falling back on protocol to mask her unease. Let's run through the establishment checklist. Suits on, systems check, then we begin surface ops. As they methodically prepared for their first lunar walk, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them. It was ridiculous, of course. They were alone out here, isolated on this airless world. Yet the sensation persisted. The team cycled through the airlock one by one, their boots leaving precise imprints in the pristine lunar dust. Sarah led them toward the formation, each step measured and careful in the low gravity. Their helmet lights cut through the darkness, creating sharp shadows that seemed to move with lives of their own. Energy readings are spiking, Marcus reported, his voice crackling through their comm system. Whatever this thing is, it's active. The formation loomed before them now, its surface smooth and dark, absorbing their lights rather than reflecting them. It rose from the lunar surface like a geometric wound in reality, all sharp angles and impossible curves that seemed to fold in on themselves. Emily reached out with her scanner. This materials, it's not registering as any known element. The atomic structure is... She stopped abruptly, her hand frozen mid-gesture. Emily? Sarah called out. What is it? It's changing. The surface is changing. Before their eyes, patterns began to emerge on the dark surface, lines of light that pulsed with an inner glow. They traced complex geometries that hurt to look at, symbols that seemed to write themselves into existence. Nobody touch anything, Sarah ordered, but it was too late. The patterns had begun to spread, flowing like liquid light across the lunar surface toward their boots. Marcus stumbled backward, but the luminescence followed him, climbing up his suit like hungry fingers. My systems are going crazy, James reported, panic edging into his voice. Something's interfering with... The comm system exploded with static, and Sarah's suit displays flickered and died. In the sudden electronic silence, she could have sworn she heard something. A whisper, perhaps, or a laugh. carried impossibly through the vacuum of space. The lights on the formation pulsed once, bright enough to leave after-images dancing in their vision, and Sarah knew with terrible certainty that they had done exactly what they'd been warned not to do. They had woken something up, something that had been waiting a very, very long time. The trek back to the lunar module was a blur of confusion and mounting dread. Sarah's suit systems had rebooted themselves, but the readings made no sense, showing impossible atmospheric pressures one moment and complete vacuum the next. The formation behind them continued to pulse with that eerie light, its patterns now spreading across the lunar surface like luminescent veins. "Everyone inside now," Sarah ordered as they approached the module. The airlock cycle seemed to take forever, each second stretching as the team waited in tense silence. Once inside, they began their decontamination procedure, though Sarah suspected traditional protocols might be useless against whatever they'd encountered. "Mission Control, this is Commander Chen," Sarah transmitted once they were back in the module's main cabin. "We've encountered an anomalous structure with unusual properties, requesting immediate consultation." The response was nothing but static. Marcus was already at the communications console, running diagnostics. "Our relay satellite's still in position, but something's blocking all transmissions. We're completely cut off." Emily was examining her suit's external cameras, playing back footage of their encounter. "Look at this," she said, enhancing a section of video. The patterns on the structure weren't random. They seemed to repeat in complex sequences, like some kind of language. "James, prep for emergency departure procedures," Sarah began, but James cut her off. "Commander, the module's engines aren't responding. All system checks show green, but when I try to initiate any sequence..." He gestured helplessly at the controls. Sarah felt that sensation again, of being watched, studied. The module's interior, usually comfortingly familiar, suddenly seemed alien and hostile. Shadows in the corners appeared deeper than they should be, and the usual hum of life support systems had taken on an odd rhythmic quality. "Did anyone else hear that?" Emily asked suddenly, looking up from her screen. The others fell silent, listening. At first there was nothing but the normal sounds of the module's systems, then a whisper. Not through their comms, but somehow inside the pressurized cabin. It was like multiple voices speaking in unison, using words that were almost, but not quite, comprehensible. "Check your suit recordings," Sarah ordered, fighting to keep her voice steady. "See if we picked up any audio during our EVA." Marcus pulled up the data, his face illuminated by the holographic display. "There's something here, but it's..." He adjusted some settings and a sound filled the cabin. It was their own voices, played back from their time near the structure, but between their words were other sounds, clicks and whirs, and something that might have been laughter. As they listened, the playback began to change, their voices distorting, stretching, becoming something else entirely. Sarah reached to shut it off, but Marcus shook his head. "I'm not playing this anymore. It's coming through all our systems now." The lights in the module flickered, and for a split second, Sarah could have sworn she saw something move in her peripheral vision, a dark shape gone too quickly to identify. The temperature sensors showed the cabin was a steady 20 degrees Celsius, but she felt a deep, penetrating cold. "Look," James whispered, pointing at the viewport. The luminescent patterns they'd seen on the structure were spreading across the lunar surface, creating a web of light that was slowly surrounding their landing site. But it wasn't just on the surface. Similar patterns were beginning to appear on the module's interior walls, faint at first, but growing stronger. Emily's scanner beeped, drawing their attention. "These readings, they suggest the material is propagating through the molecular structure of our hull. It's not just a surface effect, it's changing the fundamental properties of everything it touches." "Our suits," Marcus said suddenly, his voice tight with fear. "During the EVA, when those lights touched our suits, what if we brought something back with us?" Sarah was about to respond when all the module's lights went out simultaneously. In the darkness, the glowing patterns on the walls grew brighter, casting an otherworldly illumination through the cabin. And in that light, Sarah saw that the patterns weren't just random designs. They were changing, flowing, forming into shapes that looked disturbingly like faces. The whispers returned louder now, and this time Sarah could almost understand what they were saying. Almost. Part of her was grateful she couldn't quite make out the words, because something in those voices suggested knowledge that humans were never meant to possess. A high-pitched tone began to emanate from their communication systems, rising in intensity until it was nearly unbearable. Through the viewport, they could see the structure in the distance was now blazing with light, its surface writhing with movement, as if something inside was trying to break free. And then, clear as day, through all their comm systems at once, they heard a single phrase in their own voices, spoken in perfect unison: "Thank you for waking us." The next several hours twisted and warped like a fever dream. Sarah had ordered everyone to put their helmets back on when the whispers started coming through the module speakers, but that only seemed to make things worse. Now the voices followed them through their suit communications, speaking in fragments of conversations they'd had during training, mixed with sounds that made their teeth ache. "We need to understand what we're dealing with," Sarah said, trying to maintain some semblance of control over the situation. "Emily, what do we know about that structure?" Emily was reviewing her scanner data, though the readings kept changing every time she looked at them. "It's adaptive. The molecular structure isn't just complex, it's impossible. It violates every law of physics we know. And it's still spreading." The glowing patterns had indeed continued their slow advance across the lunar surface, creating a network of luminescent lines that pulsed in sync with the original structure. Through the viewport, they could see that their landing site was now at the center of an enormous geometric pattern that seemed to shift and change when viewed directly. "Commander," Marcus called out, his voice shaking slightly, "you need to see this." He had pulled up the module's external cameras on the main display. The footage showed their vessel from multiple angles, but something was wrong with the images. The module's structure appeared to be folding in ways that shouldn't be possible, its surfaces rippling like water. James, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke up. "The dimensions are wrong." He was staring at his hands as if seeing them for the first time. "Everything's wrong. Can't you feel it?" Sarah knew exactly what he meant. The module's interior, which she knew intimately from months of training, felt larger than it should be. Corners that should have been right angles now seemed to bend in impossible ways, and distances between objects appeared to vary, depending on how long you looked at them. "My God," Emily whispered, looking at her scanner again. "The atomic structure of everything around us is being rewritten. It's like reality itself is being restructured according to some alien geometry." The whispers had evolved into a constant background hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Occasionally, words or phrases would emerge with crystal clarity. Convergence, transformation, awakening. Sarah tried to focus on practical matters. "Marcus, any progress with communications?" "I can't even tell if our equipment is working anymore," he replied, frustration evident in his voice. "The diagnostics show everything's functional, but..." He gestured at his console, where the displays were showing impossible readings. Negative timestamps, coordinates that didn't exist, signal strengths that exceeded infinity. A sudden movement caught Sarah's attention. One of their water pouches was floating past her head, which wouldn't have been unusual in lunar gravity, except it was flowing upward against all known laws of physics. As they watched, the water began to take shapes. Complex crystalline structures that couldn't exist in nature. "The air recyclers," James said suddenly. "They've stopped working." "Oh, no, they're working differently." He pointed to the environmental controls, where the readings suggested their oxygen was being converted into something else, something their sensors couldn't identify. Emily's scanner began emitting a high-pitched whine. The structure's energy signature just changed. "Oh no." Through the viewport, they watched as the geometric pattern on the lunar surface began to pulse with increasing intensity. Each flash seemed to bend space itself, creating ripples in reality that they could actually see propagating through the vacuum. "Look at the stars," Marcus breathed. The familiar constellations visible through their viewport were wrong. Stars were moving, shifting position in ways that defied astronomical possibility. Some appeared to be changing color, while others seemed to be arranging themselves into patterns that mirrored the ones spreading across the lunar surface. Sarah felt a pressure building in her head, like the precursor to a migraine, but fundamentally different. Images began flashing through her mind, structures that couldn't exist in three-dimensional space, beings whose forms shifted and changed with every attempt to focus on them, and knowledge, vast, incomprehensible knowledge that threatened to overwhelm her consciousness. "They're trying to communicate," Emily said, her voice distant and strange. "Not through language or signals, but by changing the fundamental nature of our reality to match theirs. They're restructuring us." The patterns on the module's walls were moving faster now, flowing like liquid mercury. Equipment began to malfunction in increasingly bizarre ways. Screens showing impossible colors, metal becoming temporarily transparent, solid objects passing through each other, as if the normal rules of matter no longer applied. And through it all, that whisper continued, growing stronger. "You are becoming. We are becoming." All is convergence. Sarah realized with growing horror that they hadn't just awakened something ancient. They had initiated a process that was now beyond their control. The barrier between their reality and something far stranger was growing thinner by the moment, and they were caught in the transformation. Time had lost all meaning inside the lunar module. The digital chronometers displayed impossible sequences of numbers, sometimes running backward, sometimes showing dates thousands of years in the future and past simultaneously. Sarah had tried keeping track of the hours by counting her own heartbeats, but even those seemed irregular now, syncing occasionally with the pulsing patterns that covered every surface. "James?" Sarah called out, noticing his strange stillness by the navigation console. He turned toward her and she had to suppress a gasp. There was something subtly wrong with his face, as if his features had been slightly rearranged by an artist who didn't quite understand human anatomy. "I can see them now," he said, his voice overlapping with itself in impossible echoes. "They're beautiful, Sarah. So beautiful it hurts." Emily was frantically documenting everything with her remaining functional equipment. "The restructuring of local space-time is accelerating," she reported, though her words seemed to arrive in Sarah's mind slightly before she spoke them. "The barrier between dimensions, it's not just thinning, it's becoming permeable." Marcus had been trying to repair their communication systems, but now he stood transfixed by his own hands, watching as his fingers seemed to multiply and divide, splitting into fractal patterns before reforming. "Commander," he whispered, "I don't think we're entirely human anymore." She knew he was right. The changes had been subtle at first. Enhanced perception, impossible knowledge bleeding into their thoughts, the ability to see in wavelengths that shouldn't exist. But now the transformation was becoming physical. Their bodies were adapting to laws of physics that contradicted everything they had ever known. Through the viewport, the lunar landscape had become an ever-shifting kaleidoscope of geometric impossibilities. Mountains rose and fell like waves, their surfaces covered in symbols that burned themselves into Sarah's retinas. The original structure they had discovered was now the center of a vast multidimensional web that seemed to extend beyond the boundaries of normal space. "They're not trying to communicate with us," Emily realized, her eyes reflecting patterns that existed in no human language. "They're trying to evolve us. This isn't an invasion, it's an invitation." The whispers had become a constant symphony in their minds, no longer just sounds but complex matrices of information that rewrote their understanding of reality with every passing moment. Sarah could feel her consciousness expanding, touching minds and dimensions that no human was meant to comprehend. Equipment around them continued to transform. Their advanced technology, once the pride of human achievement, seemed primitive now, as it evolved into forms that served functions they couldn't begin to understand. The module's walls had become semi-permeable membranes that pulsed with bioluminescent patterns, more alive than inert. "Look," Marcus said, pointing to where their emergency beacon had been. The device had transformed into a crystalline structure that seemed to exist in multiple places simultaneously, broadcasting signals not through electromagnetic waves, but through fluctuations in the fabric of reality itself. James had begun drawing complex equations on the walls, his fingers leaving trails of light that branched into infinite fractals. "The mathematics of their universe," he muttered. "It's all so simple once you stop thinking in 3 dimensions. Time is just another spatial coordinate, consciousness just another form of matter." Sarah felt knowledge pouring into her mind, secrets of the cosmos, understanding of civilizations that had evolved beyond physical form, comprehension of sciences that operated on principles that would have seemed like magic just hours ago. But with each revelation came a price. Memories of her human life began to feel distant, like dreams half remembered upon waking. Emily's scanner had merged with her arm, becoming a sensory organ that perceived reality in ways their human bodies never could. "There are others," she announced, her voice resonating on multiple frequencies. "Other sights, other awakenings. We're not the first and we won't be the last." The transformation was accelerating now. Reality around them flexed and folded, the boundary between inside and outside becoming meaningless as space itself was redefined according to new geometries. Their bodies adapted to each change, evolving to survive in conditions that should have been impossible. "Commander," Marcus called out. Though the concept of military hierarchy seemed absurdly primitive now, something's coming through. The center of the module's floor had become a nexus point, where multiple dimensions intersected. Through it, they could perceive shapes and forms that their original human minds would have been unable to process. These were the beings they had awakened, entities that existed in the spaces between conventional reality. And as Sarah watched, unable to look away, she understood that they had passed a point of no return. Humanity's first contact with a truly alien intelligence hadn't come from the stars above, but from the spaces between spaces, from beings that had waited in the dark side of the moon for someone to be ready for ascension. The beings that emerged from the interdimensional nexus defied description in human terms. They existed as patterns of light and shadow, geometries that shouldn't be possible, and waves of pure consciousness that rippled through multiple planes of existence simultaneously. Sarah tried to focus on them, but her mind kept sliding away, protecting itself from concepts it was only beginning to grasp. "They've always been here." Emily's voice resonated through multiple dimensions at once. Her form had become fluid, shifting between states of matter that hadn't existed in their original universe. Waiting in the spaces between atoms, in the gaps between thoughts, in the darkness between stars. The original structure they'd discovered was now revealed for what it truly was. Not just a beacon or a piece of technology, but a seed of transformation planted eons ago. It had waited patiently through geological ages for beings capable of initiating the change, not through any specific action, but through the simple act of perceiving its existence with conscious awareness. James had become something extraordinary. His consciousness expanded outward in fractal patterns, each iteration containing infinite variations of himself. "The human race," he spoke, his words creating ripples in reality. "We were never meant to remain as we were. This is evolution beyond biology, beyond physics, beyond the limitations of four-dimensional space-time." The lunar surface outside had become a living membrane between realities. Through their enhanced perception, they could see other awakenings happening across time and space, past, present, and future, overlapping in a grand design that had been set in motion before Earth had cooled from its stellar birth. Marcus, his form now a complex array of light and information, interfaced directly with the transformed systems of their module. "There are protocols," he transmitted through waves of pure thought. "Heritage sites across the cosmos, each waiting for species to reach the threshold of awareness. We're part of something vast, something eternal." Sarah felt her consciousness expanding exponentially, touching minds across impossible distances. She saw the truth of their mission now, how their presence here had been inevitable, how every decision and event in human history had been leading to this moment of transcendence. The entities communicated not in words or images, but in pure concepts that reconstructed the recipient's understanding of reality. They showed the crew visions of civilizations that had gone before them, species that had evolved beyond physical form, becoming part of a vast network of consciousness that spanned multiple universes. This is what they meant by convergence, Emily realized, her thoughts creating patterns of understanding in the transformed air around them. Not an ending, but a beginning. Not destruction, but reconstruction on a fundamental level. The module had become a chrysalis of transformation, its boundaries now theoretical rather than physical. Through its evolved surfaces, they could perceive Earth rotating below them, unaware of the profound change taking place on its satellite. Sarah understood now why they had been chosen for this mission. Their minds had contained the right combination of curiosity, adaptability, and courage needed to embrace transformation rather than flee from it. The ancient intelligences guided them through their metamorphosis with infinite patience, teaching them to exist in states of being that their human minds would have once dismissed as impossible. They learned to perceive time as a dimension that could be traversed like space, to exist simultaneously in multiple realities, to comprehend truths that resided in the spaces between conventional thoughts. James, who had ventured furthest into the new awareness, suddenly pulsed with revelation. "They're showing me the pattern," he transmitted, "the grand design. Earth isn't just another heritage site, it's a nexus point, a confluence of realities. What's happening here, what we're becoming, it's just the first ripple." Through their expanded consciousness, they could sense other awakening sites stirring across the solar system, dormant seeds of transformation planted throughout space and time, waiting for the right moment to flourish. The moon had only been the beginning, the testing ground for humanity's capacity to transcend its original form. As the transformation neared its completion, Sarah understood that their mission had succeeded beyond any human definition of success. They had not just made first contact, they had become the bridge between humanity's past and its impossible future. The question was no longer whether they could return to what they had been, but how they would guide the rest of humanity toward what they were becoming. The entities shared one final truth. This awakening was not an end, but merely the first step in an infinite journey. Beyond this threshold lay understandings that would reshape not just humanity, but the very nature of consciousness itself. 10 days after losing contact with the Artemis lunar module, NASA's Mission Control received a transmission. It came not through their standard communication channels, but simultaneously through every electronic device connected to their network. The message was brief, encoded in a format that should have been impossible, data structured in ways that violated the basic principles of information theory. Dr. Rebecca Martinez, mission director, stared at the decoded fragments on her screen, her hands trembling slightly as she read, "We have evolved beyond our original parameters. The transition was successful. Do not attempt recovery. We are no longer compatible with baseline reality. The process has begun. Prepare humanity." The message was signed with a complex geometric pattern that seemed to shift and change every time someone looked at it directly. Analysis would later show that the pattern contained more information than could theoretically be stored in all of Earth's computers combined. Satellite imagery of the landing site showed nothing but undisturbed lunar regolith. The module, the structure, and all evidence of the mission had vanished, or rather, as later theoretical models suggested, had shifted into configurations that existing human technology could no longer perceive. But changes were already spreading across Earth's scientific community. Researchers in quantum physics laboratories reported impossible results in their experiments. Astronomers discovered that their instruments were detecting patterns in the cosmos that had never been there before. Mathematicians woke from dreams with solutions to problems that had puzzled humanity for centuries. At observatories around the world, the stars began to look different. Subtle at first, slight changes in spectral signatures, mysterious alignments that seemed to suggest purpose rather than random distribution. Those who studied the night sky for too long reported strange dreams, waking with knowledge they couldn't possibly possess. The entities that had once been Sarah Chen and her crew observed these developments from their new state of existence. They had become shepherds of transformation, preparing the way for humanity's gradual awakening, but they were no longer alone in their vigil. Through their expanded awareness, they perceived other watchers, ancient intelligences that had evolved beyond physical form eons ago, who had seeded the cosmos with triggers of transcendence, waiting for species capable of taking the next step in cosmic evolution. Earth's moon had never been just a satellite. It was a chrysalis, a transformation engine built into the very structure of the solar system. The dark side had been chosen precisely because humanity would eventually reach it, eventually be ready to perceive what had always been waiting there. Sarah, or what had once been Sarah, extended her consciousness across the dimensional barriers. She perceived humanity's timeline stretching out before her like a luminous web of possibilities. The changes would come gradually, then exponentially, a cascade of awakening that would transform not just humanity, but the very nature of consciousness in this sector of space-time. From their new vantage point beyond conventional reality, the crew watched as their message propagated through human consciousness. They had become the bridge between what humanity was and what it would become. The transition would not be easy, evolution never was, but it was inevitable now that the process had begun. Deep in the quantum substrate of reality, in the spaces between thoughts and possibilities, ancient machines older than Earth itself hummed to life. The dark side of the moon had been only one of countless trigger points scattered throughout the cosmos, each waiting for the right moment, the right species, the right level of awareness. Humanity's first step into a larger universe hadn't come from the stars above, but from the spaces between spaces, from the quantum foam of reality itself. The crew of the Artemis had not been lost. They had become the harbingers of transformation, the first wave of a change that would ripple across all of human civilization. As telescopes around the world tracked new anomalies appearing throughout the solar system, as researchers puzzled over data that contradicted the laws of physics, as people worldwide began to experience dreams of impossible geometries and eternal truths, the entities that had once been human watched and waited. They had transcended not just physical form, but the very concepts of space and time. They had become part of something vast and eternal, something that had been waiting since the first stars ignited. And now, at last, the long vigil was ending. The next stage of cosmic evolution had begun. In the depths of space, in the darkness between stars, in the quantum spaces between thoughts, ancient mechanisms continued their work. And on Earth, humanity stood unknowingly on the brink of a transformation that would reshape not just their species, but their understanding of reality itself. The truth was out there, encoded in the structure of reality itself, waiting only for minds ready to perceive it. The dark side of the moon had been just the beginning,